anger, deep grieving, and realignment of faith, to the shock of resilience, the secret romances, the discovery of independence, the relapses on the first anniversary, the return of a capacity to love and be loved, and finally, the commitment to construct a new life. I cannot imagine any greater reassurance of the powers of the human spirit, buttressed by faith, to heal itself. These stories are relevant to many situations less horrific than death by terrorism. We experience many kinds of loss and trauma in life. Within the experiences of the characters I followed is just about every kind of human struggle. It wasn't only the journey of the bereaved families of Middletown that I wanted to follow. Thousands of witness survivors were also traumatized, and past experience suggested that they would carry a dangerous burden of guilt. How would religious leaders explain the inexplicable to their depressed flocks? Would mental health professionals accustomed to dealing with traumas on the order of divorce and depression be prepared to help people make sense of lives shattered without warning by human missiles propelled out of hate? What would teachers and principals tell their students? Would friends and neighbors emerge to form vital networks of support? How would the corporate leaders calculate their debt to the bereaved families of their deceased employees, weighed in each case against the dire need to protect the corpus of a decimated enterprise? How would the police be changed by spending months of white nights at ground zero, picking through body parts to find remains of families they knew? They would not emerge from that pit the same people. Who would look after their recovery, an issue that remains a concern? Would the country's leaders demand investigation of this massive failure of government to discharge its basic duty to provide domestic security? Or would they evade, stonewall, cover up, and use 9/11 for their own political ends? The town itself became a character, a social organism turned inside out. Middletown is like many affluent middle-class American suburbs today, which are not always connected to the cities that spawned them. They appear ideal in good times, but how well equipped are they to absorb trauma? The research process. This book follows more than 50 characters. Their stories run parallel and often intertwine. To follow them all on a month-by-month basis required more than 900 recorded interviews, as well as many follow-up phone calls and emails. But the word interviews doesn't begin to convey the trust that had to be earned and the emotional nakedness that was allowed by the people who agreed to participate in this book. Over the months, we developed a special kinship. My investment in them extended beyond the writing of a book. I wanted to know their future, at least insofar as previous experience could help them navigate their ongoing passage through trauma and grieving toward a renewal of hope. I went back to interview families and survivors from the Oklahoma City terrorist bombing of 1995, and even further back to families robbed of spouses and children by the terrorist attack on Pan Am 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in 1988. The thoughts, feelings, dialogue, and actions attributed to people in the book were described to me in interviews by the participants themselves. Apart from the Holocaust, there is no clinical study of the families of victims of traumatic mass murder, especially when there are no intact bodies or only remnants. There appear to be no data on what kinds of treatments work specifically for victims of terrorism in the context of living with an ongoing threat. Another vacuum in our knowledge about coping with man-made trauma is how to protect against vicarious trauma. Those in the helping professions who step forward to offer clinical support take on heavy emotional burdens, as do those friends, neighbors, and community volunteers who offer consistent support to people directly affected. In the context of living with the ongoing threat of terrorism, how do we protect the protectors? The single event that we know as 9/11 is over, but the shock waves continue to radiate outward, stirred up by orange alerts, terrorism lockdowns, and the shrinking of personal liberties we once took for granted. The stories in this book of real people faced with extraordinary trauma and gradually transcending it are the best antidote to our fears. The one indispensable ingredient in coming through any adversity is hope. Once a person has hope, it's possible to mobilize his or her resources, both inner and outer. The families of 9/11 who have already begun constructing new lives point the way to others. Tellingly, these families are the least fearful of another terrorist attack. If they could cope with 9/11, they know they can cope with almost anything. Their stories compose a powerful parable for our times. This is a book of hope. Book 1. Surviving Trauma. Victims focus on what they cannot change. Survivors focus on what they can change. Chaplain Jack Poe, Oklahoma City Police Department. Chapter 1. Signs and Wonders. Kristen and the Raven. When the glossy black bird dropped onto the lawn outside her kitchen window that August, Kristen felt a shudder go through her body. She called out to her husband, "Oh, my God, there's a raven." "A what?" he said. Ron didn't know much about birds. "A raven," she repeated impatiently. "So?" "You don't understand. That's a bad omen. The raven is the harbinger of death." Kristen clutched her breast. She had a tumor there, waiting for biopsy. It was in the same place where her mother had found a tumor at the age of 38. Kristen had lost her mother to cancer a few years earlier. It was a horrible death. "I'm scared," she told her husband. "I think that's me. I think it's a symbol that I'm going to die." "You're crazy," her husband said. "It's just a crow." "I don't want that bird in our yard," she said. Kristen was not usually one to worry, not this surfer girl from the Jersey Shore. This was a tall, blonde tomboy who grew up with all guy friends, a natural beauty who still had age on her side. Being 30, she didn't give a thought to taming her flyaway hair or painting makeup on her smooth Swedish skin. She was headstrong to the point that she sometimes got in her own way. For instance, she almost missed marrying Ron. Kristen thought she never wanted to be tied down to one man. No interest in marriage. Zero. Hated children. Her first date with Ron Breitweiser was on his birthday, August 4th, 1996. It was the summer of her bar exam, but she found herself far more attracted to this handsome money manager than to the practice of law. Less than 6 months later, they eloped to a Caribbean island. "And I wasn't even pregnant," Kristen likes to say. But why waste time? The Breitweisers settled in the pleasant land of Middletown, New Jersey, a lush green oasis in the backyard of New York City. Their house was hidden in woods. The two of them became inseparable. She had no hobbies, and he had no hobbies, because their hobbies were each other. They would watch TV together, read books together. If Kristen got up to take a shower, Ron would follow her into the bathroom so he could keep talking to her. When Kristen brushed her teeth, she would squeeze out the toothpaste onto Ron's toothbrush. They were crazy about their dog, Sam, a golden retriever, whose discombobulated bulk somehow found its way into their bed every night. They weren't planning to have children, but when Carolyn arrived in March 1999, they turned the conversation pit of their living room into a playroom just for her. In late August 2001, when Kristen and her husband went to a cocktail party, they joked that it was the first time in 2.5 years they'd been out alone without their daughter. And it was true. They didn't need a social life. They didn't even see much of their families. In fact, Ron wasn't speaking to his family. They'd had a huge falling out. The Sunday before September 11th, for some reason, Kristen stopped to read the obituary section. She said to her husband, "Honey, you know, life is so short. Your dad's older. Are you sure you don't want to call them and just suck it up and make peace?" He said no. He just wanted to break with his family. Kristen had it good, and she knew it. She had graduated from Seton Hall Law School in 1996 and, as she liked to say, left the law at the top of her game after practicing all of 3 days. She hated it, took a leave of absence to care for her mother, but when that duty was done, Kristen showed no enthusiasm for resuming her aborted law career. Her husband told her she didn't have to go back. He could make enough money. He was a whiz at investing, so good